Today we're going to talk about character traits as we read our story for the week. A character trait is something that can be determined by the character's words, actions, and feelings. Oftentimes the author doesn't come right out and tell us about a character's personality or what kind of person they are on the inside. We oftentimes have to make smart guesses. And we can do that by looking at the words that each character says. What kind of things do the characters say in the story? What actions does the character have in the story? What are some things the characters do that can help us make a smart guess about the character's personality? Feelings. Okay, how does the character feel at different points in the story? Those feelings or emotions can help us make smart guesses about our characters. These are some examples of character traits that you may guess about a character as you read a story. We could say a character is brave if they fought off a dragon to save a princess. We could say a character is funny if they tell jokes or say funny things throughout the story. Oftentimes a character's words could help us understand the character's mean, if they say mean things throughout the story. So those are just some examples of character traits. So as we read our story this week, I want you to be thinking about the characters in the story. What are some things the characters say? What are actions the characters do? And what are some thoughts or feelings and emotions the characters experience that would give us a better idea of what kind of personality or what kind of character traits the character has? What is the character like on the inside? Now the title of the story this week is Destiny's Gift. This is a realistic fiction story, meaning it could happen in real life. The events are realistic, but it actually is a made-up story with made-up characters. My favorite place in the whole world was Mrs. Wade's bookstore, across the street from my house. Mrs. Wade knew everything there was to know about words, and I loved words. I went over to Mrs. Wade's every Tuesday and Saturday. As soon as I walked into the store, the wind chimes above the door tinkled in a special hello. Hello there, Destiny, Mrs. Wade would call out, and stop whatever she was doing to give me a big hug. She smelled like flowers and peppermint and had long silver braids that fell to her waist. What's the word? Mrs. Wade would ask. Let's go find out, I would say. We'd rush over to the big, thick dictionary Mrs. Wade kept on a pedestal in the store. I'd close my eyes, open the dictionary, and point. Whatever word my finger landed on was our word for the day. Mrs. Wade always helped me with words I didn't understand. We sounded out each word and picked it apart like a puzzle until I knew all there was to know about the word. I wrote down everything in my notebook, which I carried everywhere I went. So on this page, we notice some clues that can help us learn more about Destiny's character. Here are some clues about her actions and her words. When she would go in the bookstore, it said that she loved words. Okay? And she went to the bookstore every Saturday. And when she would go to Mrs. Wade's bookstore, it said she loved to look in the big, thick dictionary and learn everything there was to learn about a particular word. So these clues here in the story helps us understand that Destiny's character loves learning. She loves to learn new things. And the author didn't come out and tell us that, but we can make that a smart guess based on her words and actions in the first part of the story. Let's get back to the book. When I wasn't writing words, I was reading them, gobbling them up from the pages of a book as if they were candy. Mrs. Wade also gave me a new book to read. She even introduced me to real authors who came to read books at her store. I liked to talk to them because they loved words just like I did. That's how I decided I wanted to become a writer when I grew up. On Saturdays, Mama and Daddy let me stay at Mrs. Wade's until closing. I helped Mrs. Wade around the store. I watered the plants and fluffed the big, comfy pillows where people could curl up and read on the floor. Then Mrs. Wade and I would put a new book on the shelf. Sometimes I'd open a book, stick my nose in between the pages, and take a big whiff. It smelled like ink and grass and the old clothes in my granny's closet. The crisp paper felt like autumn leaves between my fingers. Now again on this page we can see some clues about Destiny's character. It said on Saturdays she got to stay at Mrs. Wade's until closing. Then she helped Mrs. Wade around the store by watering plants and fluffing big pillows. She would put the books on the shelves. Okay? So her actions here on this page helps us make a smart guess that Destiny's character is very helpful. She enjoys helping. Back to the story. The part I liked best about Saturdays was the end of the day after all the customers had gone. Mrs. Wade would set up a tray with peppermint tea and butter cookies, the kind that had a hole in the middle. We would drink our tea and pretend the butter cookies were diamond rings around our fingers. Then I would read to Mrs. Wade from my notebook. She'd listen to my stories and poems with her eyes closed. I'd imagine I was a famous author reading to a room full of people. Sometimes after I finished reading, Mrs. Wade would open her eyes and would say, "Words are very powerful gifts." I wasn't sure what she meant, but I felt very important indeed. Then one Saturday, everything was different. When I got to Mrs. Wade's store, instead of talking to her customers or unpacking new books as usual, Mrs. Wade was reading a letter and looking very sad. She put away the letter and smiled when she saw me, but I could tell that she wasn't her usual cheerful self. Later, while we had our tea, Mrs. Wade told me what was wrong. She took my hands in hers, and we sat with our knees touching. "Have you ever had a really tough assignment in school, but no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to figure it out?" she asked. I nodded. Math problems were always like that for me. "Well, I've been trying for a long time to figure out a way to keep my bookstore open, but I haven't had much luck," Mrs. Wade said, sighing. "My landlord is raising my rent, and I can't afford to pay the new amount. I may have to close my store." For Mrs. Wade sighed again. I thought I saw a small tear in the corner of her eye. My heart froze mid-beat. Close? No! I couldn't believe it. "Why? Why do you have to close the store?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I need to earn more money in order to pay the higher rent, and there just aren't enough customers for that," Mrs. Wade said. "We can get more," I shouted. "We'll see," Mrs. Wade smiled, a sad smile. "We'll see." When I got home, I told Mama and Daddy about Mrs. Wade's store. I cried so hard I didn't think I'd ever stop. Mama and Daddy wrapped their arms around me. "I know how much the store means to you," Mama said, stroking my hair. "Maybe there's something we can do to help," said Daddy. Mama and Daddy got on the telephone and called our neighbors. The next day, everyone on our block came to our house to talk about what we could do to save Mrs. Wade's store. The following Saturday, all the kids in the neighborhood passed out flyers to get folks to come to Mrs. Wade's bookstore. The grown-ups contacted the local TV, news stations, and the newspapers and called Mrs. Wade's landlord to ask him to lower her rent so the store could stay open. On Saturday, we made signs that said, "Save our store," and marched around the neighborhood. It felt like being in a parade. The next Saturday, we had a huge block party to raise money. There was singing and dancing and tables of good food. I helped Mrs. Wade at her table, and we sold boxes and boxes of books. I had so much fun, I almost forgot to feel sad. Almost. Even with all the signs and flyers and the block party, I still wanted to do something special for Miss Wade. I wanted to give her a gift that would be just for me. I thought and thought, but couldn't come up with any ideas. "What are you thinking so hard about?" Mama asked. "I want to make a special gift for Mrs. Wade, but I can't think of anything," I said. "Well, why don't you close your eyes and take a deep breath," Mama said. "Then remember all the good times you had with Mrs. Wade at the bookstore. I'm sure you'll come up with something." I closed my eyes and followed Mama's suggestions. Suddenly I had an idea. I jumped up, got out a notebook, and started to write. I wrote down everything I loved about Mrs. Wade's store, from the sound of the wind chimes hanging on the door to the smell of the brand new books and Mrs. Wade's peppermint tea. I wrote all afternoon and all evening long. Mama and Daddy even let me write during dinner. The next morning I finished writing and ran over to Mrs. Wade's store as usual, at its usual opening time, but when I got there the store was closed. My heart pounded with fear as I peeked through the front window. Could Mrs. Wade have closed the store without telling me? I was about to go home to tell Mama and Daddy when I heard Mrs. Wade's voice. "Destiny, here I am," Mrs. Wade called from her stoop next door. "Why isn't the store open?" I asked. "I just needed some time to think," Mrs. Wade said. "Will you have to close the store forever?" I whispered. "I hope not, but I'm not sure, Destiny," Mrs. Wade said sadly. "It's hard to know if customers will keep coming back." I didn't know what to say. Then I remembered my notebook. "I have a present for you," I said, and handed the notebook to Mrs. Wade. Her eyes lit up with surprise as she opened it and saw Mrs. Wade's Bookstore by Destiny Crawford. "Why don't you read it to me?" Mrs. Wade asked, a big smile spreading across her face. I read every word as Mrs. Wade listened with her eyes closed. When I finished, Mrs. Wade gave me a big, long hug. "Destiny, this is the best present anyone has ever given me," she said, beaming. "Words are a powerful gift indeed." At the time, I knew exactly what she meant. Mrs. Wade and I don't know if the store will close, but until then we are going to keep reading and writing and gobbling up words all we can. So here in the closing of the story, we see several examples that lead us to make the smart guess that Destiny is a very thoughtful, caring person. She helped organize activities in her community to raise money for the bookstore. That action shows us she cares about Mrs. Wade and she's very thoughtful. Also, at the end of the story, when she talks about wanting to give Mrs. Wade the very special gift, and she worked so hard on her notebook. Again, those clues show us that Destiny is a very thoughtful, giving, sweet person. So we will learn more about character traits throughout the year, but now you guys have a good start to knowing how to find clues in the story. Remember, we look at the characters' words, their actions, their feelings or emotions to help us make smart guesses about their personalities or their character traits. What kind of person are they on the inside?